After years of stigmatization, misinformation, and prohibition, the psychedelic experience aims to educate and inform in an unfiltered way about the effect that psychedelics have on the lives of real human beings. So please join me in exercising this freedom of expression.
Declined chemotherapy, and it wasn't long really before I was on this flight to Peru with cancer, like feeling very scared and having like no idea really how this is all going to unfold. It felt like a massive risk. I just needed to take it, and I was also just like, I need to just trust in this vision that I had, you know, and the kind of message at the time was follow the breadcrumbs.
Thank you so much for coming today. I really appreciate it, because neither of us were supposed to be here. We both could have died. We both almost died, and we would have never been able to have this conversation. So I really appreciate your presence today.
Yeah, thank you for having me here. And yeah, it feels like a beautiful like opportunity you've created for me to share this story that I don't really know how I'm going to share. So we'll see how it goes. But thanks for having me.
Well, I'd love to hear your story, because I think that you really have an amazing story that people need to hear.
Thank you.
So why don't you start by telling us who you are?
Yeah, who am I? The big question. On a simple level, like my name's Rhys. I live in the UK. I guess for a while now I've had sort of like quite a big curiosity around like what we're doing here and what life's all about, you know, and sort of asking the bigger questions or the deeper questions. I don't know, but I've been asking questions, and yeah, I think that's enough as an introduction.
And you had some experience with mushrooms early on. What led you to taking that step forward?
Yeah, so I mean, I'd grown up and become conditioned by this idea that sort of mushrooms were bad, you know, or psychedelics were bad, and to be afraid of them really. So although I'd been like curious for some time, like I think when I was about 18 I probably became particularly curious about psychedelics. I watched like documentaries about ayahuasca and things like that on YouTube, but there was still like a lot, I would say more fear, or too much fear, that kind of blocked the curiosity that I had for a while. And I just feel like as time passed, that fear had started to reduce. I think the more like I was learning about psychedelics, the more the fear was reducing, and I was more open to the possibility of how they could support me, because really I had been experiencing like long bouts of depression, intense anxiety, and my experiences when I was younger sort of and feeling like different, because I grew up and I was like the gay kid who was really sensitive, and so I felt quite sort of rejected for my differences, and didn't feel like valued or appreciated or celebrated in my unique, like, you know, expression of myself. And so I feel like my identity had become quite focused in separation, and so I felt very like sort of alienated, and as if I didn't really sort of belong here in a way. Like I literally did feel like an alien, and that like there was some terrible accident. I was just put on the wrong planet that I wasn't designed to be able to be a part of, literally in my way of being. And so yeah, I was kind of curious of how mushrooms might support me with sort of changing the relationship I had with myself. But I don't think it was as conscious as that at the time. It was just this curiosity I had. And I guess what fueled my initial work was a conversation I had with a friend, and she just said, "I really feel like I need to talk to you about mushrooms." And I heard it in a way where I was just like, "Oh, I need to listen to this," and it kind of ignited something within me, and this process that was playing out in my dreams, which was I was having dreams after that, like literal dreams when I was asleep, where I was like looking for mushrooms, but I couldn't find the right kind. And then that led to this like final dream I had, if you like, where uh, my nan came through in this dream, and my nan had died like sort of not long before this time, and I like loved my nan so much, and yeah, when she sort of came through and she presented me basically with these mushrooms, and they were like bright purple. And when I woke up, I just felt like that was quite significant, and I think it helped me feel less fearful, and kind of um, actually kind of try mushrooms for the first time.
And what were your experiences like starting?
Yeah, so I started really small, but in a really small dose, and I was at my friends in the countryside. It's like a perfect place, really. There was no one around. I was just surrounded by trees in a really beautiful house, and yeah, I just ate a few, and the influence was just really subtle and was very much felt. Um, and I think the thing that I was realizing was like, I remember getting to a point where I was like, oh, this is what they're talking about. And when I say they, I mean like the Ram Dass and the Alan Watts types, who I'd sort of listened to a lot and were accompanying me, I guess, in a conceptual awakening that I'd sort of had. I think I'd call it that, like a conceptual awakening, where I was sort of introduced to spiritual ideas, I guess. But I didn't really have much experience of those ideas. And this felt like the bridge almost between like opening up to those conceptual ideas, but them kind of coming more into my body, like, and experiencing them through physicality in a way. Um, but I would say that the mushroom experiences I had in the beginning were more of like a series. They felt very much like connected to one another. And after my first experience, the message was like, "Don't call us, we'll call you." So I sort of had this felt experience of like almost like I fell into a bigger arena to play in. It felt like, so I was like introduced to this bigger arena to play in, but it was also like as I was kind of coming back into like sort of more of like what felt like a bit of a rigid form. It was just the message that came with that was, "Don't call us, we'll call you." And I took that as like kind of don't go to back to mushrooms like uninvited, and to always sort of come by invitation. That felt really important in the beginning. And so I did that. I sort of waited by the phone, so to speak, like, because I was really excited by these experiences. It felt very playful in the beginning before I went into the shadow aspects. But yeah, so I was like waiting by the phone. The call would come in different ways. And I guess the easiest way to say it is mushrooms became like my teacher, I guess. And I got taught so many different things, and some of those things I'm still yet to kind of translate the messages, even now, and that's like a few years on. But ultimately, they sort of excited me for life again, and introduced me to like a more fuller way of experiencing myself, which definitely had begun to sort of to dissolve the like that kind of really strong sense of separation that I was describing, and that sort of alienated sense. I feel like I almost went as far as I could in my separation sense of separateness. um and it was like, yeah, now you're like returning. And one experience that I will share, like kind of briefly, with that, it was like there was one experience I had where it almost felt like I was so you know, like when you're when you go to a nightclub, like you have to show your ID to get into the club.
Hmm.
This felt,
Yes.
yeah, so this felt like in order to get into the club you need to like leave your ID at the door, like your identity cannot come with you. And I had a party in what I describe as like the unidentifiables club, which is like you know, without identity. And I can't really talk about what you can experience in that space because it needs to be discovered like individually, I feel. But
Mm.
it was the first time I'd really experienced something like that, and it felt like a reunion. It felt like this sort of, it felt like everyone was at a party that I was sort of late to in a way, but early to at the same time.
Mm.
um but actually I was right on time. Like, you know, I arrived at the time that was right for me, but there was people already there that had come to this realization and played in that space, and there was people that were yet to come. You know, that's sort of how it felt.
I think so often when people want to share about their experiences with psychedelics, they can't use quantifiable terms. They have to use metaphors. But I don't think that makes them any less true or any less accurate. I think that sometimes the only way to describe these experiences is through metaphors. So I really resonate with the way that you would describe that.
Mm. Yeah, and it's important, I guess, what you say, because yeah, this is far from literal in the sense that it wasn't quite like that, you know, in the way I experienced it, but that's the closest it is to like physical, to a physical reference, I guess, that I have. Um, and so yeah, that was kind of the beginning, really. There's a lot more in there, but I feel um, it's where it goes next that is probably where I'd like to go.
Okay, let's hear about where it goes next.
Yeah, so I was still sort of processing these experiences, I guess. Didn't quite at that point come into the realization of how important integration was or what that really looked like. But I was aware that I was experiencing myself out of the context that I knew myself in, and I was meeting with all the chaos that sort of that induced, I guess, this whole reordering um, my sense of myself within a new context that housed all these experiences I was having in that space. Um, and so I was just kind of getting on with my life, really. Nothing was really changing. I was just trying to make sense of everything. As in, nothing physically was changing, but I was trying to make sense of all these experiences that I'd had. And I was also trying to, I think it's important to say, I was trying to connect with others in these experiences I was having, because these experiences were mainly, aside from the one at my friends in the countryside, were in my bedroom, on my own, in meditation. And so I was having these experiences, and then I'd, you know, like run downstairs because I still live at home with my parents, and I'd be like, "Mom, like I've just had this like experience," like, and she would just look at me with like such a vacant, like, you know, she just didn't understand. And I don't think, I felt really frustrated. You know, I've softened to that now, but at the time I felt so frustrated that I couldn't convey these experiences, and that sort of when I shared them, they seemed to reduce in value in some way. Um, that that other people perhaps couldn't appreciate, like, you know, how transformative those experiences were feeling, because they didn't have the references to understand that. And um, I almost felt a little bit like I wasn't really being taken seriously in those experiences. I think I felt like I was being written a bit like the crazy one, but that could just be me, you know. I feel like I often have felt like the outsider, and I write that story for myself even when it doesn't exist. Um, so yeah, that was all going on. But what happened next? Let's get to that. Um, so away from mushrooms for a moment, I basically one day I got an email to say that I was a match for stem cells, a stem cell donation. So if people don't sort of know what that is, or sort of what that means, is I was part of a register that is sort of for anonymous donation, basically. So if someone comes up that needs stem cells, then they check the register for a potential match. And so I'd got this email to say you might be a potential match, and part of that meant that I needed to go and have a health check, basically, just to make sure I was fit and well enough to go ahead with this donation. And I think it was just to take more tests to like kind of ensure I was a match and all that sort of stuff. And so I'd gone up to London for this health check day, and I was going through all the checks, everything was kind of going okay. And then I got to one part of the day, which was kind of more of a consultation where I was just speaking to a doctor about my like history and things like that. And previously to that, like prior to that day, I'd found like a lump on my testicle. And I didn't think it was right, but I'd already gone to a doctor about it. And they just sort of said, it's just a cyst, like we'll put you in for a non-urgent scan. I hadn't had that scan at this point, and so I mentioned this lump to this guy I was seeing on this day, this doctor, that I was seeing on this particular day, and his reaction to it was very different. And he was like, because of your age, I just really feel like we need to get this checked. And so they sent me down for a scan, like almost instantly, had an ultrasound, and the doctor wasn't giving the look that you want to see, like the look of reassurance, like, oh, that is fine. His was a look of concern. And he flagged that and was just like, I want a second opinion on it. So, if you go back into the waiting room, we'll call you again and it will be a different doctor just so he can do this, the same scan, another ultrasound. And so, yeah, only a few moments had passed, and then I was back in having another scan, and this time there was like 3 doctors all looking at my pulse. So I was like, okay, this is like, I'm having to get comfortable now with like being seen by whoever, which I thought was quite funny. I find that quite funny, reflectively. But yeah, anyway, he wasn't happy either, and I just said at the time, like, do I need to be worried, like? And all he said was, no, because there's treatment. And I didn't know what that meant, really. I mean, I kind of did, but it wasn't clear enough. And I feel like there's this real thing with doctors that I've experienced through that and in other experiences where you kind of get locked out of your own sort of health. And I'm sure that's like well-intended, like a protective thing to kind of just gradually inform you of what's going on. But for me, it felt worse because I left that hospital that day that they said, like, we'll get back to you like as soon as we can. But I left that hospital feeling like I didn't really know what was going on, but something wasn't right. And I rang my mum, and was just like there's a lump and they're not happy about it, and I don't know what that means. And I was really confused because I thought I was just going up to do a health check this day to donate stem cells. I didn't think it was going to turn into like there's something going on with me. And so anyway, they called me the day or two later, and yeah, they did end up telling me on the phone, because they wouldn't at first, that they think it was cancer, like testicular cancer. And I was back up in hospital on the Thursday to meet with the consultant. So when I did that, he just said, we're not going to do like a sort of biopsy. He was like, I'm pretty certain that it's cancer. So, it's a removal of the testicle. It all sounded pretty straightforward. Wasn't ideal, but, I was okay with it. It didn't feel like a massive thing, because the way I was understanding it at the time was, they take that out and then that's it. It's done. Like, that's the end of it. And so he was like, I can operate on you tomorrow, by the way, if you want to. And so the health check day was on a Monday. I'd gone back up on the Thursday, and then on the Friday I went back up again, and I had the operation. So it was
Wow.
so fast,
Mhm.
from diagnosis to operation. I think it's like record speed, really, which is a credit to the NHS. Really is, and they treated me so well. And then I just spent time recovering, really, thinking, yeah, it's all done. I just need to recover now. And then I'd been transferred to a different doctor at this point, a doctor who specialized in testicular cancer. And he, just said we need to like run some more blood tests, like, and things like that. And we did that. And that's when it changed, because he could see that the markers in my blood that were kind of, he was using to like kind of see what the cancer was doing, had raised since my last blood test, which would suggest like there was still cancer in my system. And with that, the pathology result had come back to say that there was like a lesion. The testicle, I don't know, I'm not a scientist, so I don't really know what that means, other than that it suggests that the cancer's spread, or has the opportunity to spread, which is not great news. And yeah, so basically what that meant was that it went from me feeling like, oh, this is done, to no, you're going to have chemotherapy, which, just as an idea, was really devastating. Like, when I found that out, I was just like, no, like, I know nobody would want to have chemotherapy, but it just felt really just like, I really don't want to do that. It didn't feel right, but I just thought it was what I had to do. Um, and my doctor was saying, you have, I think it was supposed to be 3 rounds, which had a certain amount of sort of like chemo sittings, if you like, in each round. I think it was like 7 per round. So it was like 21, I think, 21 days of chemotherapy over a 3-month period. And it was just a lot to try get my head around, really. I was just like, I don't know how I'm going to, yeah, kind of get round to agreeing to this when it felt so wrong. Um, and I really struggled with that. I felt like I was trying to make it fit and trying to make it work, when it didn't feel right. And yeah, with that, I just kind of was, yeah, just trying to make it work. And it was a morning before I was about to go to hospital, and it was about 2 weeks before I was going to start chemotherapy, that a friend messaged me, and she sent me a voice note, and she was just suggesting basically that there's other ways of treatment, and like alternative ways. She didn't really say what, but she was just kind of, getting at this idea that there's other ways. And it really annoyed me, actually, because I was like, I'm just trying to get my head around this, and I'm just coming into agreement with this way of treatment. And then now you're kind of inviting me to sort of consider that there could be another way. So it really unsettled me. I was raging when I was on the way to the hospital. My mum was driving, and I was just fuming. And when I got to the hospital, I just said, this just doesn't make sense to all the experiences I've had with the mushrooms. Um, just wasn't making sense, because one of the messages I had through the mushroom work, it was, don't lock yourself into physical limitations, like into the limits of logic, I guess, and the rational sense of things, that is so much more beyond that. Um, and I kind of had that in my mind, I guess, to some degree. And so after that appointment, I was like, I'm going to go back to the mushrooms. I don't know what to do, so I'm going to go back to mushrooms. And yeah, so it was like the next day, mushrooms were on my shelf in this jar, and there was like, the remainder of what I had in this series that I kind of call like the beginning experiences I had. And it almost felt like the end of the series, because it was the remainder of mushrooms, which was the biggest amount that I had experienced, and I ate them all, lay down in bed, like, and just went into meditation really. And yeah, it wasn't long before I started to experience sort of the influence of the mushrooms, and it was very much like initially I was sort of taken into the kind of realm of possibility, if you like, but it was like more around all these influences of like you could be this or you could be that, and it was like all of this kind these pulls to be something other than who I was, which I guess I'd spent a lot of my life doing. Didn't feel kind of comfortable in myself, felt wrong in myself, so I was kind of constantly, you know, taking on like this idea of being something else, you know. Oh, I'll just be that person and I'll just play that and do that, and this was going on for quite a while. And I remember thinking, I just want to be me. Like, I just came to this realization where I was just, I just want to be me. And all of that just left at the moment I kind of came to that realization. And then, to keep it kind of simple, I guess, because I don't want to get too lost in all the details, but I then explored who I really was, you know. And I didn't really realize when I was asking that question of like, who am I, that it would kind of go as deeply into everything as it did. And it was like, you know, it's the most godly experience I think I've ever had, in that exploring who I really am, you know, that not the I that I kind of knew myself as much deeper than that. And I think that's why I don't have words for it, because I don't think there are words for it. But I experienced it, and I was blown away, really, by what was.
And so at this point of discovering who you are, did the medical issues that you were facing at the time factor into this experience?
No, so they weren't. And once I was kind of at a certain point in exploring like the who I really am sort of arena, if you like, I came to that and I was like, but what about the cancer? Because that was I wrote in my journal before I started that trip, like, my intention was to kind of have guidance or some direction around what to do with the cancer situation. And so I asked the question, what about the cancer? And a little bit of time passed, and then what started to happen was I had this vision of like this story in front of me, and I was watching it being written. Um, I couldn't really tell exactly what, I couldn't see words or anything like that, but I could feel um, sort of the sense of the story. And sorry, I'm just having like a sound thing. I'm getting a bit of backlog, but yeah, I basically sort of saw this story, and I was falling in love with it. And the more I was falling in love with it, um, the more I sort of came to this thing of like, oh, I really want this story. Didn't really know what it was, but I was connected to it in some way. And as soon as I said like, I want this story, it's kind of message came sweeping round that was like, this could be your story. Um, and then I was taken into different snapshots of like seeing other people's reactions to me doing something different, like to me healing in a different way. And it was like my doctor's reaction and my mum's reaction, and like my doctor's reaction was like I could see his confusion and I could feel his confusion, and then with my mum it was like sort of this surprise, you know. um and because I didn't understand at that point that I was experiencing like those visions like outside of time, if you like, um when I came round, I thought I was already healed. I just thought, oh, I'm already healed, you know, they're going to do my blood test just before I start chemotherapy and it's all going to be fine. Um, and so I really felt like that. And then I went to therapy. And in therapy, I realized, no, I'm going to actually have to actively do something to create and create this alternative way, you know, or walk that alternative path. It's not just going to happen like that, you know, like, because part of it was about me learning to take responsibility for my life. And a big part of the story, and I knew it at that point because I wrote about it after, it was that it was about learning to trust in myself again, because I'd really like I was really distrustful in myself. I felt like there was something wrong with me. So I was like, how can I trust what I think and feel? Because I felt that there was something wrong with me. So this was the opportunity to really step into what felt right for me and to actually create, you know, my own way of healing. And so, yeah, in this therapy session, I'm like, damn, I've got to do something. I've actually got to do something. And it really upset me because I thought I was already healed. So it was quite a bitter pill to swallow. But as the universe works in wonderful ways, it wasn't long before, because I had no idea what I was going to do at first, in my alternative approach. And then synchronicity started to come, and I got the piece of information that I need to go to Peru that became very clear to me, through a message from a friend that is a whole nother story in itself. And then the other piece of information came through another person I knew, who said, I shared with them about like what my situation was, and they just said, you need to speak to this person because they've done something similar to what I think you want to do. And this person sent me a link for a dieta in Peru. Didn't know what that was at the time, and I'll come to that in a moment if that's okay. But I maybe wanted to go to declining chemotherapy because that was sort of what came next. I rang my doctor and I was just like, I'm not going ahead with chemotherapy. Like I just said I've got to trust in something else. I think I knew deeper down that was myself, you know, and following in what felt right for me, but I just said something else. And he, you know, it just was like, there's really like, there isn't another way, like, and sort of, I think he was worried that I was sort of in denial, you know, of what was happening. And he was, you know, having quite a stern conversation with me and trying to get me to realize that I was like really putting my health at risk, like, because my statistics of, you know, survival were really good. And although the cancer had spread into the lymph node in my abdomen, which is what the CT scan showed, it hadn't yet spread anywhere else. And he was saying, you know, it's just about to go to your lungs, to your brain, like. And I was like, yeah, like, and I just kept having to come back to like, I'm just going to trust in something else. And so, yeah, declined chemotherapy. And it wasn't long really before I was on this flight to Peru with cancer, like feeling very scared and having like no idea really how this was all going to unfold. It felt like a massive risk, but I just needed to take it.
And you must have been scared as hell.
Mm,
I would imagine.
mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I was, and I was also just like, I need to just trust in this vision that I had, you know. And the kind of message at the
Mm,
time was, follow the breadcrumbs. And that's what it felt like. It
mm.
felt like I was following all these breadcrumbs. And yeah, so then I'm in Peru, and I arrive at this family's sort of space to do a dieta. and I don't know whether to sort of go into like the
Sure.
the details of that sort of thing. So in a simple way, if anybody like doesn't know what a diet is, it's I've forgotten now. It's like a simplified diet, isn't it? So you might be able to help me out with this bit. Um,
Yeah, a traditional ayahuasca dieta, or is just eating a small amount, sometimes once, sometimes twice a day, being in isolation. So and not using things like entertainment, anything that gives you information or gives data, don't use it. So we have the food, social isolation usually, or you can talk briefly with people who are on the same level, like the shaman or anybody else who's doing the diet, and then no, internet, cell phones.
mm,
Traditionally, you're not supposed to even listen to music. Well, I mean, you're not supposed to have an iPod to listen to music. You can play music, you can create things, but you can't consume things. That's the idea.
mm. Yeah, that's a beautiful way of putting it. Like create, not consume, because that's
Mm-hmm.
how I felt, and just everything was like stripped back. And so for
Mm-hmm.
me, I found that really challenging because of what I was going through, I think, as well. Like to then go into like isolation where we weren't really encouraged to speak to one another. Um, I found really
Mm-hmm.
hard. Like I was just in my heart in the jungle thinking, what am I doing? Like, what am I doing
Wow.
here? Um,
Mm.
and it was definitely a dance between trust and fear. It kind of felt like, I kept having to hand the fear into this deeper trust, and it was a continual process of that. But early on in my experiences there, and actually, the other component with the dieta is working with a master plant. Um, so the kind of structure of my stay was, and what I'd booked was a 2 week stay in the jungle, and that involved 5 nights sitting with ayahuasca, which is something I'd never done before, and the other part was working with a master plant, which we would get given at the beginning, and then we drank that plant every morning um, for as long as it lasted, basically. Um, and so when I sort of was in the jungle, the first thing was like a meeting with the family. And so I sat down in the maloka, like the ceremonial space, and I told them like why I was there. Um, I mean, they already knew on the intake that that's why I was there, but it was the first time I was telling them myself, and I was like, I've got cancer, and I was like, just crying and really like scared and upset, and the language difference was quite hard because I didn't know any Spanish, and so we were kind of speaking through the facilitator who was translating everything, and they just were talking amongst themselves for a while as to what they were going to be doing, and then they just said, we're going to give you ubos, and all they said was like anti-cancer. So that was the master plan that I was given to work with. I knew nothing about ubos at the time, um, and that was that really in terms of the beginning. And there's so much I could say about this experience. I don't really know where to almost go with it. um, I guess the Icaros is something that was really special to experience, and something that was very new to me, which the first time in ceremony when I heard the Icaros, I was like, wow, there's like something really deep and profound going on here. um, it was like, I don't know, I think the fears that I arrived with sort of subsided in that, because I felt like they was sort of connected to something much deeper than I was aware of. Like I could feel it, but I wasn't aware of. I struggle to describe what I really felt in that. But the first time Inez, who was like the um, sort of head of the family, if you like. The first time she came and sat in front of my mat and sang to me, I just heard my nan through her voice, and it was just really deeply emotional, but also again really affirmative. And I'm really realizing as I've been talking that my nan has been really the kind of the she showed up to kind of say that it's okay and that things are safe in two quite significant times, both with the mushrooms in the beginning and then also the beginning with ayahuasca, which, yeah, there's something feels quite significant in that for me, and feel like kind of really hearty, that my nan was that influence there to be like, you're okay, you know. And yeah, ceremonies themselves, like, I didn't know what to expect. I was quite scared about the purging aspects, and always felt like kind of ayahuasca kind of is kind of badged as the like really big medicine, like, you know, the, I don't know what to say of that, but like, you know, to be taken very seriously in a way. And I really felt that. But the purging went from something I feared to something I was like really welcoming. I was realizing that through that was the greatest gift of like release on such like a deep level, like the deepest levels, like releasing stuff I didn't even know I was holding on to. Um, but when it comes to the cancer side of things, I was, obviously didn't forget that I had cancer, but I was just kind of like getting into like the experience of the jungle. I was embracing it. And it wasn't until my fourth ceremony where that day during the daytime, I was just like, it started to creep up on me again of like, what am I doing? Like, I've quit my whole life. Like, I'm out here. Like, I'm not really talking to anyone else. Like, I've got cancer. Like, it all started to kind of build again. Like, I guess this fear, or perhaps just a need for like clarity, I think, or a want for clarity. It was just like, and that kind of set me up for the ceremony in a way, because that night, like, the first question I asked in that space was just like, what about the cancer? Like, it hadn't been addressed really. My work with UBOS was bringing up sort of trauma dynamics and feelings and emotions that I was linking with cancer, or like associating with the manifestation of the cancer. And that was a lot to do with like feeling wrong in who I was, you know, like in my sexuality, and, you know, all those sorts of things. And but yeah, there was nothing sort of very clear. And so I'd asked in this ceremony of ayahuasca, what about the cancer? And the ceremony just went on, and I'm sure I was just exploring other things. I can't really remember. It's all a bit of a blur. Like, now every ceremony seems to have just blended into one another. I think the more I've integrated, the more it's just like this blend. But what I can't forget, or won't forget, is a little while after I asked this question, I had this swooping message come round that was just like, consider it taken care of.
Wow.
Yeah. And I was just so relieved, and I was just like, the excitement I felt was just like no other, really. It was just, consider it taken care of. Which I think is really funny language as well. Like,
Yeah, yeah. It's so funny how the messages that ayahuasca delivers, so often they have a flair or a style, or they're
mm,
comedic.
mm,
It has a funny way of being delivered.
yes. And it felt quite formal in a way, but quite playful at the same time. Because, yeah, and I just didn't want to forget what the message was. So I was like, you know, in my mind, just I kept saying it over and over, and I was like writing it imaginary on my body, because I was like, I don't want to have any doubt. Like, I need that to stay clear. And so I know that's exactly the words, because I made sure I remembered. And I couldn't wait to leave the ceremony that night, because I was just so excited, and I wanted to, like, you know, I was finding the dieta really hard in terms of like the not more the social aspect, I think. Um, that kind of level of isolation. And so, yeah, I was very much like excited that I could go home, basically. So I ran out of the Maloka that night and was just booked my flights home. I had a couple more days in the jungle after that, and one more ceremony, which felt like a closing ceremony. You know, it was a very beautiful experience. And then, you know, I was on my way back to England, really, feeling very grateful to the family and everyone that was there, to the facilitator. You know, they held me so beautifully, and I felt so safe there. Um, and you know, in such beautiful hands. Like, I really couldn't have asked for anything better. And you know, I was well aware that was the way that I wanted to heal. You know, like when I was there, I was like, yeah, this is it. When I was like throwing up and like, you know, I was like, yeah, this is the way. It felt right. And so, yeah, go back to England. I'd already arranged blood tests with my doctor because I was quite, you know, although I'd got this confirmation through ceremony, um, and more confirmation through that the family let me leave, because at one point they were like, you might need to stay longer. Like, they didn't know how long it was going to take. And because they let me leave, I remember someone saying to me, they wouldn't have let you go if, you know, you needed to still be there. So I had those bits of confirmation, but I really wanted my blood work confirmed as well. And so I arranged that for when I got back. I had one blood test and things weren't quite back to normal. And I went into almost like panic, like, oh my God, have I just got this all really wrong? Because it can be really hard, like when you're having those sorts of experiences, that to know whether you are just sort of like making it all up or something. I don't know. It can be really confusing. And that kind of entered me into that space for a moment. Then I did another blood test, and my doctor rang me, and I was just at home, and he said, "What did you do in Peru?" And I knew as soon as he asked me in that sort of way that something had happened. I just knew. And he was asking me all different questions. I said about ayahuasca. I didn't mention Ubos in my first call with him. I just said I've worked with ayahuasca, and he was like, "Are you still working with it?" All these things, you know. He'd never heard of ayahuasca before, so he had no context for it. And I just explained, yeah, I'm not working with the medicine anymore. That I'd had like 5 ceremonies when I was out in Peru, things like that. And I just said, well, what are my numbers then? Because he wasn't sort of telling me. I said, what are my numbers? Like, and he read the numbers, and I was like, they sound low. And I was like, are they in normal ranges then? And he so reluctantly said yes. I think he was apprehensive because he didn't, I don't know, did he not want to get my hopes up that it had gone? I don't know. I wasn't him, but it felt a bit like that. And so when I heard like my numbers were in normal ranges, I was just like, I've just experienced a miracle. And not only that, I've also just met with this the vision that I had in the mushroom ceremony before I left, where I saw his reaction. I'm suddenly meeting with the reality of it, and it all slotted into the time that it was to make sense in, you know. And like, that was just so special, like so special. And I was, it's still, the emotion as I'm talking about it is still so much there, you know. It's still really there because it was just amazing. And
You know, a lot of people would hear a story like that and say like, well, how is this possible? How did this happen? You can't do that. What I'll say right now is this: as a society, as a modern society, if we want to figure out about psychedelics, that's not the approach that we need to take. We need to start saying, we need to start just listening. It's just an amazing story that you have. I'm just in awe.
thank you. Yeah, listening and experiencing, I feel, is probably the way to understanding, or being able to realize that that is possible, because I didn't think it was, you know. I thought it was quite outrageous what I was doing. And since I made that, you know, when I went out there, I realized that actually there are people healing from all different types of things in very alternative ways, and it's actually not as uncommon as it felt to me in the life I was living, you know, at the point where I was invited to go and heal in that kind of way. At that point it was like outrageous to the context I had around me. But actually when then you go into those spaces, it's like, oh, actually it's not that you know, it's still a miracle nonetheless, but it's there are many miracles occurring in those spaces, in those psychedelic spaces, in all different ways. The gift for me was that it came in such a physical way, and I've come to feel that it was less about the cancer was something that people take seriously, right? Like people take cancer seriously. It affects a lot of people, and you know, I'm a writer and I want to tell a story, you know, and I need the story to have. I wanted the story to have, you know, merit, and you know, it does in the way that, yes, I can't prove it, but my blood work tells a story, and I've got every single letter that I've had, you know, that tells what my bloods were. I've kept every single letter. It tells a story. There's like actual physical evidence on some level that I think, you know, it feels important to me. But I do sometimes think that is also because I wanted to prove that I wasn't, you know, wrong in myself. And, you know, through this whole healing process, really my story, I just want to say, I guess, is not about if you get cancer, this is what you do, because that's actually the 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 opposite of the point. The point is, find what feels right for you, and that might be conventional ways of medicine, like that very well might be chemotherapy, right? Like, but it might also be something completely different. It might be going to India to an ashram or something. Like, I don't know what that looks like, but the healing takes place, I believe, through what I've experienced in finding our own way. It's not in following like other people's way, you know. I think that's where we can kind of really stray from ourselves, and I spent my life doing that, trying to follow in everybody else's way because I didn't trust in my own. And this was about returning to my way and healing through finding my own way, and I'm still finding my own way, you know.
It is often said that the biggest problem with modern society is that we are disconnected from spirit. And if you look at spirit as your higher self and people not being connected to their higher self, it's no wonder why there's so much sickness popping up in the modern world.
Yeah, I feel like you're so right with that. And yeah, it was a magical experience for me. And I also want to be just really honest as well, that I had a massive breakdown after the experience too. You know, it wasn't like I didn't stay long in the wow, this is so incredible, and you know, it's such a miracle. Like, I'm still in that in some way, but I also had a massive breakdown because I'd become quite my ego had become quite inflated. Actually, I'd went from feeling quite disempowered to feeling so empowered, and I wanted to take that power. And then I collapsed because I realized I don't want to do that at all. I don't want to like hoard power. I need to translate it through everything now, which was part of this massive breakdown, that where all this power that I'd sort of realized through myself then fed back into everything else, which was a really important part of the process. But it was very like sort of destructive for the old self, you know, that kind of died in that process. So there was a death, you know, multiple deaths, even though it wasn't. I mean, they were never saying like you're going to die from this cancer, but I think when you get told you've got cancer, like it's hard not to go to death. And I think the thing is, I still did go through death, you know, just in a different way. And now I don't know where I'm going. It's like I trust in myself, but I still have no idea where I'm going or what I'm doing. But I am going back to the jungle, and I'm going to do another dieta, which,
Nice.
yeah.
Yeah, that's still, you know, that kind of question, what are you doing? What are you doing next? Is something that a lot of people, including my family, have asked me many times on my journey. And like, my answer has always been, I'm not really exactly sure. We'll see. But I mean, things seem to unfold as I walk, as I go. The steps seem to appear. And I think modern society really has a kind of anxiety about like, okay, let's plan exactly how this is going to look, and if we don't stick to that plan, then we have to freak out. But really, I
Yeah.
mean, like we know the best things in life are not planned.
Yeah. Yeah. But I guess it takes a lot of trust in what you're saying, like to trust that those steps will kind of, the earth will catch you as you take a step, sort of thing, and just being with each one. um I don't know, I was kind of writing about it earlier actually, that like, it's kind of that feeling when you do sort of venture off the well-worn path, that you are in the wilderness, and there isn't really, there's just exploration really. There isn't kind of like a clear way forward. um it's just exploring your way through, which is a much more beautiful way of living, and I'm imagining you discover a lot more, uh through exploring the wilderness than the well-worn path. But there is something still that I find quite appealing about that well-worn path, that you can kind of see mapped ahead of you, as to the one where there's sort of, you're not really reliant on a map externally anymore. It's like this internal navigation system that you're trusting to like move through life. And I'm still adjusting to that. It's still, um yeah, even going back to do another dieta, it's like, really, are you really, like, it's only been 2 years, I'm like, am I really going back? But the signs are clear, and I can't argue with the signs. I can't argue with the calling. Like, I tried.
Amazing, amazing.
Yeah.
Rhys, where can people find you if they want to find you?
Yeah, where can people find me? I guess my Instagram is probably a beautiful
Sure,
place if people want to connect, and sort of,
sure.
yeah.
I'll link that.
Yeah, if you can link it. It's my name, so it's probably easier to link it than it is for me to say it and
Sure.
spell it. But
Okay. Yep.
yeah.
No problem. Okay, it's amazing. Thank you for having the courage and the courage to be so vulnerable. I can really, I mean, I can imagine how tough that can be to tell a story. I mean, the thing is that you're left with a certain piece of truth, and we all need to express ourselves and tell people who we are. We need to live our truth. But if your truth is something that is going to be stigmatized or criticized, it puts you in a pickle.
Mm,
I think this is a big problem with integration is if you don't have a place, an outlet to express yourself, or you are criticized when you express yourself, that can stop you. You can stuff it in if you don't. So thank you so
yeah.
much for doing this.
Yeah. No, thank you so much, because yeah, this is like another form of integration, and that constant process, and it's such an important part, isn't it? It is like essential really to um translate those experiences, or sort of, um what is it, sort of like, yeah, develop them into your sort of, through your everyday experience, and sort of weave them in and out. I don't really know what I want to say there, but um yeah, I think otherwise it can be very um confusing, and we can get lost in sort of misunderstanding exactly what we've experienced in those spaces. So thank you so much for hearing me out. I feel like I've talked a lot, but thank you so
Well,
much.
you have a good story to tell, so we need to hear your story.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Awesome. All right, good luck in the future. We'll see you again.
Yeah, and you. Thank you.